dog sniffing each other's butts, French kissing, and boogers. All I have to add are jelly beans, authors, and perfume. Let's give it a go. All right, taste versus flavor. Mr. Woodard talked about taste versus flavor. I love the example of smelling a bowl of sugar. This is one of my favorite examples to do in class. You can do it at home, no problem. Take a jelly bean or a mint, something that has a really strong flavor to it. Make sure it's something that you like. Don't torture yourself. And what you do is you take the jelly bean, and the first thing you do is you plug your nose, and then you pop that jelly bean in, and you start to chew. You'll taste sweet right away, but you'll have no idea what flavor that jelly bean is until you unplug your nose. So that's the fun thing. You pop in, you chew, and then you unplug your nose, and that flavor will pop up. It's a great way to remember taste and flavor being different. Moving on, smell. Mr. Woodard talked about smell not being routed through the thalamus and how important smell is for memory, how from an evolutionary perspective, smell is such an important sense to keep us safe. I'll throw in too, as an English teacher, Mr. Woodard's an English teacher as well, authors oftentimes use smell. Those olfactory bulbs are like right next to the amygdala and the hippocampus, the emotional center, the memory center. And so that's it. It doesn't, like Mr. Woodard said, it doesn't have time to go and do a bunch of other stuff in the brain. It just goes right to your memory and emotion. Ooh, I shouldn't drink that sour milk. Authors use smell oftentimes in their books. And the reason they do that is they know that it will tap into their readers' emotional memories more quickly than descriptions of other sensations. Now, they use other imagery and other sensations as far as imagery is concerned. They oftentimes use smell because they know that that will grab a reader's attention, because the reader will have an emotional reaction to a particular smell that's being described. And then speaking of smell, Mr. Woodard talked about dogs smelling each other's butts, pheromones, and most people know that animals rely on the sense of smell to a great degree. Well, human beings are animals too, and we do as well. And Mr. Woodard talked about the video that we might show with the smelling of the shirts. We have created artificial pheromones. Anytime that you dab on some perfume or cologne, that's an artificial pheromone, right? Used to either attract a mate or just to be more socially acceptable, be around people and to attract people to you. And so that's an artificial pheromone, cologne or perfume. Okay, let's get on to a couple of different senses. I'm going to put up this whole slide here, but I'm going to talk about these individually, but they go together as well. Now think about all those other senses that we've been talking about rely on the external world. We need those sound waves to come into our ear. We need light waves to come into our eyes. We need to touch something, a surface, for the somatosensory cortex to light up and feel something. We need exterior world. Well, with kinesthetic sense and vestibular sense, these are actually taking place within the body. Kinesthetic, going back to our etymology here, if you break that down, kinen is to move, and aesthetic, I believe, I can't remember the exact Latin, is to sense. So to move, to sense movement. And if you think about it, we don't have to consciously think about our movement. We have figured out how to move our bodies, and we understand where our bodies are in space and time. And we might learn a new activity, and our bodies have to get used to it. It's muscle memory, right? So if you're learning a new sport or something like that, your body has to get used to it, and that's that kinesthetic sense. Great example that's on the slide there. If you just simply put your hands behind your back and then put your left foot in front of your right, and then you can switch them around, and you can keep your balance just perfectly fine because of your kinesthetic sense. You know where you are. As a coach, oftentimes coaching teenagers will all of a sudden have those huge growth spurts, and coaches will sometimes see a really skilled athlete all of a sudden become a little bit more clumsy over a summer because they grew so fast. Their bodies are actually, and we say that they're growing into their bodies still, they're still figuring out how to move longer limbs and taller frames. And that kinesthetic sense is kind of finding its equilibrium. Now, if you want to have some fun with that same exact experiment, putting your hands behind your back and your feet in front of one foot in front of the other, close your eyes. Now, this it's not dramatic, but many people will close their eyes, and that'll be a little bit tougher. They might sway just a little tiny bit. What's happened there is you've taken the IQ out of the process, and we'll talk in a minute about how the senses work together. So you've taken the visual cues out of the process. So your brain is relying more on the vestibular sense. And that vestibular sense, vestibule, that some people have heard in relationships to churches especially. Vestibule means like royal court entrance or entrance to chamber. And the vestibular sense is all done in the semicircular canals of your ear. Let me switch slides here. I know this looks kind of funky here. If you go back to an earlier slide that Mr. Woodard was talking about, he referenced the semicircular canals. I like this picture here because of the 3D nature of it. You can see that these three semicircular canals that I'm moving my cursor around right here, you see how they're on different planes? Well, what's going on in the semicircular canal is there is more fluid, just like in our cochlea. That fluid is called endolymph, like a lymph node. You don't need to know that. And those semicircular canals are at different angles. And what's going on is they're at angles, especially for your head, that are in line with your head movements. So going up and down, or turning left and right, or tilting. And when you move your head like that, what's going on in those semicircular canals is that the fluid is moving, and that is helping your body to orient itself. What's going on when you close your eyes and do this is you're starting to rely on that vestibular sense, taking away those visual cues. So your vestibular sense has to kind of kick in a little bit more, and that's why there might be a little bit of swaying because it's just kind of figuring it out a little bit. If you spin around and around and around and around, and all of a sudden you stop, you feel dizzy. Why? Because the fluid in those semicircular canals is still swishing around a little bit. So it's trying to figure out exactly where your body is oriented to gravity. By the way, there's little hairs in those semicircular canals. And when those hairs get jostled, just like in hearing, what is going on, this time those hairs actually release neurotransmitters. Those neurotransmitters tell the brain what's going on as far as movement is concerned. Now, again, a lot of times if you're spinning round and round and round and you get dizzy, what do? You close your eyes. You're taking the visual cue out of the whole motion process. Remember when Mr. Woodard talked about the McGirt effect and how the vision can override other senses? Well, this is one place where if the visual cue of what you're seeing around you is too disparate, it's too far apart from what your semicircular canals are saying, that aids in the dizziness. There's too much of a gap there and you feel even more dizzy. So oftentimes people will kind of close their eyes and that takes that visual cue away and it helps them feel a little bit better. Simulators also, if you've ever ridden in one of those simulators, we used to have one down in Riverfront Park. I don't think it's there anymore, but you get in and you're riding a roller coaster and all that the simulator is doing is this. If you're outside of the simulator, all you see is this big box going like this. But you feel like you're on a roller coaster. Why? Because it's just playing with the fluid in your semicircular canals. Add the visual cue of a roller coaster and you really feel like you're on that roller coaster. Pretty cool stuff. Okay, this slide here is just where in the brain the different sensory regions are. And won't spend a lot of time there because I know I'm running out of time. Again, they're just your basic terminology. As far as the five senses are concerned. Synesthesia is one of the most fascinating things, and every year I have students in my class that have synesthesia. All of this is when two senses, there's that thesia again, two senses are crossing over, syn meaning together, right? And so there's a great YouTube video that we show, I think it's linked here, and it's actually, what happens in synesthesia, all those different areas in the brain are very close together, right? And sometimes the wiring gets such so that senses actually cross over. So you might get somebody that sees numbers in color. So certain numbers have different colors. The YouTube video that should be linked there is, and if it's not, you can just Google it on YouTube or search it on YouTube, is a young woman who hears color. When she's hearing music, she's seeing color. And so she actually paints paintings based on the colors that she's hearing in the music. So synesthesia, really, really neat, neat phenomenon. Embodied cognition is when you are actually emotionally feeling whatever it is that you're sensing. So there was a famous experiment that was done. People that held warm drinks felt more warm feelings than did people holding cold drinks. Embodied cognition. So whatever you're sensing as far as what you're feeling, literally touching and feeling, will actually influence our emotional states. I'm rushing through this. Okay, just remember psychology is the study of those three things. It's on all tests, and there's a great slide here with things that you should remember, and there's also some cool things with saccadic eye movements. This will kind of wake your brain out. Last thing before we go, I hope my review experiment worked and that I have reviewed habituation with you a little bit. At the beginning of the video, you probably were like, oh, Davis has a hat on again. What's he going to say about the hat? When's he going to take the hat off? And I never took the hat off, never said anything about it. You probably got used to it. If you didn't, I apologize. You can go back and watch the video without the screen being on. All right, there's chapter 4.